Hello, everyone. Dr. Eames here. This time, I'd like to talk to you about the trend towards mixed economies. What we find is that neither the free market nor the command economies that are out there have really created the kind of sound economic conditions that not only create private wealth for people, but also take care of their well-being. As you can see here from our two definitions, the free market economy is an economic system in which the market determines what goods and services are made and who's going to get them at what price. It's about supply and demand. Whereas the command economies are systems in which it's all about what the government decides. They generally own all the means of production in most industries and all the companies, or if they don't own them, they tell those companies what to do and what to produce and who will get them and at what prices. So today, what we really see is a trend by both of these types of economies to go mixed. And a mixed economy is simply a system in which some allocation of resources is made by the marketplace and some by the government. And we have this situation because neither the free market nor the command economies have really created those sound economic conditions, like I've mentioned. So what we see is that demand economies are essentially socialist or communist. So much of what I'm going to say here will be sound like a review because we did spend quite some time comparing the socialist and free market economic systems. But we see that the socialist governments are generally cutting back on social programs and lowering taxes and moving towards capitalism. Well, if they're cutting back on social programs and they're lowering taxes, they don't have the money to fund the programs that they have. They're not satisfying their socialist government sort of structure. And in fact, they are making a big change when they move towards some capitalism. We also see something similar from the other side. Capitalist countries are increasing the number of social programs they have, and they are moving more towards socialism themselves. So, what we see is that no one economic system is perfect by itself in creating wealth and the accumulation of private wealth, as well as taking care of the general well being of the people in any given region or culture. Free market mechanisms simply haven't been responsive enough to a nation's social and economic needs, and they haven't adequately protected the environment. And then you would have to say that socialism and communism has not created enough jobs or enough wealth to provide those incentives that are needed to keep an economy growing and keep it indeed moving ahead. So we have to pretty much assume that no country is purely socialist or purely capitalist, but rather some mix of the two systems. The United States does have a mixed economy. And so, this role of the government in many parts of our own economy has long been a source of political debate in the country, and it will continue to be so for a very long time. Certainly, just the fact that the US government is the largest employer in the country has something to say about that we have moved a little bit towards a mixed economy. Okay, here we have a comparison. This is a good graphic for that. And it's very similar to the information we talked about when we compared the free market economy to the socialist sort of governments. But it doesn't hurt to go back through these and reaffirm these ideas. So when it comes to ownership, when we look at a free market economy, companies are owned by private individuals or groups of individuals. And in the command economy, the industry is dominated by government owned businesses, government managed businesses, and very few, if any, privately owned enterprises. When it comes to incentives, well, the free market economy operates under the profit principle. And that is a huge incentive. If I have the opportunity to get wealthy, I'm going to work a little bit harder. When you compare that to the attitudes in the command economy, the government really does provide little incentives. You're not going to be allowed to get rich. Everything is going to be less efficient. It's going to be less profitable. But everyone maybe generally will be better off personally, but no one is going to be getting rich in a system like that. Under prices, we would say that certainly under pre-market, free market economy, that it's supply and demand that determines that equitable price. But in the command economy, we throw out the notion of supply and demand. The government sets the prices it thinks are sufficient for the economy, and it leads to other things like shortages and surpluses and so forth. So when it comes to the factor of efficiency, the free market economy is very much about efficiency. You get great incentives to be efficient, to cut costs. In other words, you can beat your competition, you will make more profit, you'll have a bigger market share. So efficiency is stressed and it's important. Whereas you look at the command economy, and the government is going to distribute all the resources, certainly, but there's no incentive to be efficient or to innovate or come up with new and better ideas and ways of doing things. So that's tied into the way we look at equality. The free market certainly falls down when it comes to equality. There are going to be huge disparities in the accumulation of wealth. Will be that smaller percentage of people who are incredibly, fantastically wealthy, and a greater portion of the population who are near or at poverty. And what's ironic about this is that the attitude is that this is to be expected in free market capitalism. We are going to see these big disparities in equality. The command economy, this is one of the better things that it is able to do. It does distribute resources better. People do get free health care and universal education and all the rest. So it's a leveling field. But certainly there isn't much incentive to grow and develop and the other things that you would like to happen. So some examples are Hong Kong and Singapore is what's listed here for the free market economy. They have very limited government intervention. But Hong Kong is in the news in a big way. Right now, for the last year almost, we've seen riots and protests in Hong Kong. They're due within 2 years to revert to complete Chinese control under a treaty signed with the British some years ago. Well, the Chinese have more or less decided they want to take over sooner. And we've seen a lot of strife because of that. We're not going to see Hong Kong last very long as a free market economy. There's going to be much more emphasis on a command economy as the Chinese take control over there. Now, Singapore is different. They're a very unique sort of city-state in the world, really, when you look at it that way. And business of all sorts and commerce does happen with very little government intervention there in Singapore. Now, when we look at the examples for the command economy, we see the first one listed there is the Soviet Union. This is woefully out of date. Soviet Union hasn't existed for about 20 years. This should say Russia. Now, Russia is definitely a command economy. It's an authoritarian government. It's an oligarchy run by a choice elite few of very wealthy people. Most scholars and academicians look at that as a criminal enterprise, actually. The oligarchy is centered around the energy industry, and all the big players in Russia own big stakes in these energy companies searching for petroleum and natural gas and things like that. And so they have more or less adopted that stance, and all their eggs are in one basket. Well, with less reliance on fossil fuels around the world and a plummeting price, it doesn't seem like a real smart move. And so Russia has definitely had, as a command economy, some problems. China's listed as a command economy, but that has been changing. And they're the example of the biggest change from a communist, completely dominated economy to an opening up of many capitalist practices. So we do have some people in China, individuals have become incredibly wealthy, and some private companies that are wealthy. At the same time, it's still a communist regime that could change at any time. And then the other example here is Cuba. Cuba really has not realized great success since their communist revolution. Their command economy is virtually nowhere. And before the communist revolution, certainly Cuba was the jewel of the Caribbean and the largest center of commerce in all of Latin America, with Havana as a huge bustling port and so forth. And that has certainly gone away in the last couple of generations. So when it comes to the overall problems that we find in these comparative economies, the free market economy, the big one is that inequality that we see generated, the huge disparities in the wealth and so forth. And sometimes the market gets it wrong, and we can have cyclical actions like depressions and recessions and so forth, and trends that swing back and forth. So this is why we have a little bit of a trend towards a command economy where the government will step in a little bit and adjust interest rates and tell the banks to do this and that and so forth. And some of the other problems that we have are dealing with monopolies, where today our industries in our economy, our free market economy, have become dominated by huge players with a tremendous wealth in the retail, online, e-commerce sector. We have Amazon, of course, and brick and mortar stores. We got the largest retailer and employer after the government in the country with Walmart and so forth. And we have many, many monopolies spread throughout our economic system in the energy sector, in the communication sector, and so forth. We look to problems in the command economy, and they're just those things I have been talking about. They're inefficient. They're tied up in bureaucracy, in their authority relationships. They tend to have shortages and surpluses of goods. There is no real good, solid strategic planning going on. The populace and consumers in general have a lot less choice, and they have a lot less freedom. Okay, folks, that's all I want to talk to you about this time. I'll see you soon.